Across the Pacific, a wind river moves day and night with a force that few people in the 1930s truly understand. Japanese meteorologist WWII charts it carefully with weather balloons and notebooks, discovering an invisible highway high above the ocean that can carry anything light enough and tough enough to survive the cold. Years later, when the war has turned against Japan, officers and engineers remember those charts. If a fragile sphere could ride that river at 30,000 feet, it might cross to North America in a few days, unseen, unheard, until it falls out of the sky with a fistful of fire. They give the plan a deceptively simple name: Fugo, the weapon that floats. Factories are scarce, aluminum scarcer still, but paper is everywhere. Mulberry bark washi paper, strong, light, and patient under a craftsman's brush. Schoolgirls and women's brigades paste hundreds of sheets into gauze, seal the seams with a sticky konyaku paste, test each panel for leaks, and stitch it to the next. Day after day, the smell of paste and paper fills gymnasiums and halls. The finished envelope is big enough to bury a truck. It breathes like skin and weighs little more than a man. A metal ring hugs its waist like a belt, holding an array of sandbag ballast, fuses, batteries and bombs, small incendiaries to start forest fires, a fragmentation charge to kill and frighten, and a mechanism to end the balloon's life when its job is done. The most ingenious part is the altitude control. The jet stream is strong, but the air up there is cold and thin, and hydrogen contracts at night and expands in sunlight. If the sphere simply drifts, it will sink at night and rise by day until it bursts or freezes. So the designers build a circular rack with dozens of sacks of sand and a barometric switch wired to squibs. When the balloon sinks below a set pressure, below its assigned altitude, the switch fires a tiny cutter, a sandbag drops, and the balloon becomes slightly lighter. The ground falls away again. Above a higher threshold, a vent opens to bleed hydrogen before the balloon bursts. On paper, it is a little mine running in circles, dropping weight every time the sky presses too hard, venting gas when the sun swells its lungs. Coupled to a timer and fuses, the whole contraption will, after days of drifting, drop its munitions and then destroy itself in flame. No crew, no radio, no recall. Launch sites line Japan's east coast in winter 1944 and early 1945, where hydrogen plants hiss and soldiers in heavy coats walk between sand-filled racks and bundles of paper. The launch crews wear gloves against the cold and the acid. They hold ropes and watch the fabric rise, the huge sphere pulling against the hands in the earth with the unsteady strength of a newborn. Officers glance at wind plots and give signals. One by one, the white shapes lift away, wobbling, then steadying, then climbing into a sky without sound. Newspaper editors hear nothing. Radio operators hear nothing. The balloons become part of the weather. Days later, in the American West, small reports begin to accumulate on desks with coffee rings and pencil grooves. A rancher in Wyoming finds a tangle of ropes and lacy cords with unfamiliar fittings. A logger in the Cascades hears a thud and smells a sharp chemical odor, and then, later, sees a flash upridge. In Alaska, soldiers watch something pale sink into a marsh and vanish. In British Columbia, a fisherman finds a silk-like fabric snagged in trees. In Montana, a lineman sees a brief arc on a high-voltage line and then silence as a substation trips. Each incident is nothing by itself. Junk blown from somewhere. A prank. The war turning up in small ways in big landscapes. But reports carry fingerprints and letterheads, and patterns can cross tables faster than they cross mountains. Before long, Army intelligence and the FBI have a thin stack of photographs, bits of paper, stamped metal, and burned fuses that look nothing like anything domestic. They have a problem that isn't a plane or a submarine. They have a drifting weapon. In Washington, the Office of Censorship meets with editors and asks for silence. This is not the martial drum of propaganda, but the quiet pressure of absence. If newspapers describe balloon landings with dates and counties, Japan will learn that the jet stream works and will fine-tune the altitudes in fusing. If the press is silent, the engineers across the ocean will be blind and conclude that the program fails. Most editors comply. Newsrooms that would otherwise relish a front-page oddity run nothing. Radio men bite their tongues. It is one of the rare moments in which secrecy is simple and effective. The silence saves lives, at least for a while. Inside the War Department, planners consider the balloon's likely purpose. Incendiaries suggest forest fires, panic, and resource diversion. A fragmentary charge suggests shrapnel in a pasture, a roadside, a schoolyard. There is a darker possibility too, jars or tanks of something living. The Army's Chemical Warfare Service and public health officers whisper about bacteria and fleas, about Unit 731 in Manchuria, about Japan's experience with plague and cholera in China. A few memoranda speak the words out loud and then go quiet again. There is no proof that any balloon carries biological agents to America. There is proof that the idea circulates. Patrols and ranger stations receive quiet briefings. County sheriffs are told to report strange debris without alerting crowds. Fire watchers are told to keep eyes on ridgelines no matter the weather. Anti-aircraft units see a new silhouette in training slides, a circle above a tongue of rope. The balloon's technology is at once primitive and exact. The paper skin cracks if it dries. Crews paint it with a lacquer that smells like old closets and seaweed. The batteries fail if they freeze. Crews bundle them in insulation and trust the iron logic of the controller. Sandbag droppers jam. Crews cycle them by hand on the ground and add a spare. Some balloons lift perfectly, ride the wind at 30 to 35,000 feet, and arrive over North America with a kind of destiny. Others tangle in launch ropes and tumble. Some ice over and plunge. Some cross into the Gulf of Alaska and die at sea without being seen by any eye that can report them. For the ones that make landfall, the final hours are scripted. Ballast nearly gone, fuses cut. A small bomb drops trailing a paper streamer with a metal vein. The incendiaries scatter, a main charge falls free. The balloon, now lightened and wounded, climbs one last time and then, when a final timer burns through, the envelope and rigging burn and fall apart. It is elegant in its way, cruel in its purpose, and subject to the same indifferent physics as everything else that flies. On March nights, a few fighter pilots out of the Northwest climb toward radar blips that blink and fade like ghosts. They swear at the cold roaring past the canopy and scan above the deck of stars for something that ought to be visible and is not. A balloon is a big target on paper and a small one in air, its thin skin nearly transparent, its rigging hard to see unless the moon makes a halo of frost. A few are shot, a few are chased and lost, many are never seen. The greatest danger they pose is not a spectacular explosion or a city in flames, but a series of small harms that add up. A brush fire in winter, a substation outage that scrams a reactor miles away, a child's curiosity turning into a detonation on a Saturday. In May 1945, a young pastor in Oregon drives with his pregnant wife and a handful of children to a favorite picnic spot under pines thick with shade. The war in Europe is days from ending. The Pacific feels far, the afternoon near. The adults unload food and blankets while the children run uphill, calling to each other the way children do when the air is cool and the ground springy. One of the kids finds something shiny in the brush, wires, a dome, a strange parachute cloth. The mother, Elsie Mitchell, calls out to wait, to be careful. There is a sound that no one there has ever heard before, the flat pop and punch of a charge meant to scatter fire. When the smoke clears, 5 children and a mother are gone. It is the only fatal balloon bomb incident on the U.S. mainland, and it sits like a small black stone in the history of a war otherwise measured in mountains of such stones. The government's silence gives way to warnings, posters and pamphlets bloom, soldiers scour the hills with careful steps and long sticks. Not far to the north and east, a web of wires hums with the power that feeds Hanford's plutonium reactors, the secret machines whose output will later compress a core into a man-made sun over the desert. One day a balloon line brushes a conductor, flashes and falls. Relays trip, a siren rises, and technicians run to shut systems down in a practice dance. For a few hours the plant is quiet. When power returns and the routines resume, no one outside needs to know what caused the pause. Inside, a red notation on a log reminds those who read it that the war is never entirely over the horizon, even in a facility that does not appear on any map. Most balloons land where no one sees them or where no one knows what they are. Ranchers find circles of paper like the shed skins of huge animals. Hikers come upon ribs of aluminum half buried in snowmelt. Children on prairie edges find cords that hum when plucked and carry them home like trophies until a sheriff comes and takes them away without scolding too hard. The FBI builds a kind of taxonomy in its files: envelope fragments, valve parts, battery type, fuse residue. The War Department traces sand from ballast bags to river deltas in Japan, identifying beaches by the composition of their grains, as if reading a fingerprint in a handful of grit. The analysis is clever and comforting. The enemy seems ordered and knowable when you can circle a place on a map and say, "Here." But the jet stream does not care where a shovel dug the sand. It carries whatever it is given until vorticity and chance drop it. There is a second silencing that happens after the first. When the war ends, editors have no more reason to keep quiet, but the balloons are no longer new. They are no longer part of a war fighting for headlines. They become the kind of story that an editor assigns to a junior reporter on a slow day. Find an old farmer who remembers one. Find a fire chief who kept a fragment on his desk. Comb the archives. A few make it into magazines with careful drawings and large margins. A few museum curators carefully label a battered valve rack and add it to a case about the home front, between ration books and a victory garden shovel. The little war that crossed the ocean by wind becomes a footnote to a colossal war that crossed by ship and plane. This underplaying is not exactly unfair. The Full-Go campaign did not alter strategy or swing elections. It did not level cities or burn the Midwest. Its casualty count in North America is mercifully small. Its greatest achievement may have been a modest demonstration of something that still matters: a high-altitude river that can carry tools, sensors, weapons, and ideas across a planet with no passport. Jet streams now steer airliners, drones, and weather balloons that sample the thin air for traces of disease, smoke, and nuclear tests. Oishi's data, ignored by many contemporaries because he published in Esperanto and was far from the big European salons, now live inside every aviation forecast. In a way, the balloons are as much a monument to his insight as they are to the desperation of a wartime laboratory breathing paste fumes and hope. On the Japanese side, the project draws on military units with oddly civilian skills: chemists who know glues and papers better than explosives, engineers who think in weights and altitudes instead of armor and angles, signalmen who wire barometers to circuits that no one has had to trust before. There is a debate inside the plan about payload. Incendiaries are easy to make and morally simple to justify in a war that has already burned cities to their frames. Fragmentation charges are simple devices. Biological agents are technically harder and morally worse. There is talk and testing in laboratories far from the launch sites. There are rumors of fleas, powders, ampoules. The central government feels the tightening ring of blockade and air raids and wonders what, if anything, can wound an enemy who now flies overhead at will. The balloon program becomes a cheap answer to an expensive question. Launchers count success by launches, critics count success by fires. No one knows how many reach the other side, and that uncertainty eventually kills the program as surely as Allied bombs kill factories. In April, the launches stop. In May, the last tragedies play out on a hillside in Oregon and in a few quiet power stations, and then the wind highway carries nothing more dangerous than cirrus and dust. After the war, the Pacific Northwest keeps finding ghosts. In the 1950s, a hunter stumbles on a rusted mechanism, touches it with a stick, and jumps back when a coil springs on old energy. In the 1960s, a farmer turns up a paper panel under loam with a plow and wonders what it is before folding it and putting it in a barn where mice chew it into history. In the 1970s and 1980s, forestry crews detonate a few live charges found under brush with the kind of respect one learns after losing a finger to a chainsaw. In the 2010s, hikers in British Columbia find a metal cylinder with fins. The RCMP calls an EOD team. A safe detonation blooms white against spruce. Each time a reporter writes a paragraph or two. Each time a photograph shows hands in nitrile gloves holding something that was supposed to disappear 70 years earlier. The moral reckoning is quieter than the technical analysis. The Full-Go program used girls and women to paste paper because they had the hands for it, and because every able-bodied man was already taken by a different machine. It launched the weapon with an unpredictable path that guaranteed it would sometimes land not on a tank park or a shipyard but on a church picnic. It suggests how easily a country at war will convince itself that a small risk of a large wrong in the enemy's backyard is acceptable when one's own cities are on fire. It also suggests how fear of retaliation and a sense of proportion can still function inside a total war. A biological payload might theoretically frighten an enemy. It might also provoke a response that annihilates the program and those who ordered it. That calculus was corrosive in 1945. It remains corrosive now. The American response: censorship, debris analysis, quiet warnings to sheriffs, a lack of public panic, was a rare moment of administrative grace. It had its own costs. Families who might have stayed away from a fallen device did not because they had never been told to be wary, but judged against the alternative of feedback that improved the enemy's aim. The silence looks like strategy rather than denial. The War Department sand analysis, so patient and exact, was a form of reverse engineering that used geology as a spy. It says something beautiful and bleak about a war that allowed a handful of grains to act as a message between shores. For a long feature documentary, a map is the best companion to this story. Trace a line from the east coast of Honshu to the mouth of the Columbia River, to the forests near WWII, to the sagelands around Hanford, to the prairies of Alberta and Saskatchewan, to the mountains of British Columbia. Along that line dot small icons where something fell, where someone saw a silent shadow at noon, where a line tripped and a light went out, where a child bent down to touch a shiny fuse. Each dot is a story that few people in the town remember now. Most are known only because an officer with a neat hand filled out a report that made its way to a banker's box in a federal building and survived a purge one summer because someone at a shredding machine was bored and took a long lunch. If you listen to the families of the Oregon dead, you hear a thread that runs through many homefront tragedies. It is the calm before, the packing of baskets, the argument over which hill has the better view, the quiet kindness of a pregnant woman bringing children into the woods, the small things that anchor an afternoon to a life. War intrudes without trumpet or drum. It is a pressure wave from far away carried by cables and orders, and, in this case, by wind. It is hard to know who to blame and impossible to find anyone who can undo what a 1-pound detonator did in a second. The grave markers in that town do not say enemy action, but they could. From a narrator's perspective, the story invites images that are both precise and lyrical. The shimmer of hydrogen across paper lit by warehouse bulbs, a white globe shrinking to a pinhead in the blue sky while men in gray coats hold ropes. A phone ringing on a detective's desk and a voice that says, "You should come out here and see this," followed by a long drive and the smell of resin, a handful of sand under a magnifying glass, a tiny copper squib that once waited to bite metal free. It invites a different kind of image too. WWII on a roof in the 1920s, watching a weather balloon drift until it is swallowed by light. His notebook in Esperanto on a table no one else visits, a page that shows a wind river in numbers and arrows that every pilot now glides into, as if it had always been there. The long arc of the Fugo story does not bend toward revelation so much as toward understanding. It shows that even in a total war, economies of effort shape weapons as much as grand ideas do. Paper instead of rubber, sand instead of radio guidance, a barometer instead of a pilot. It shows that a global war brushes even the quietest places with its sleeves. It shows that there is a kind of power in refusing to speak when silence starves an enemy, and a kind of danger in refusing to speak when silence starves your neighbor of a warning. It shows that the jet stream is both a scientific wonder and a strategic avenue. It shows, finally, that memory keeps what it can, a photograph in a county archive with a caption typed by a clerk long gone, a warning poster on a museum wall, a story a grandfather tells once and only once because the telling costs him more than the listener can see. Look again at the wind. It still flows, cold and indifferent, from west to east over the wide water. If someone wanted to, they could still float a sphere into it. They would not choose paper or sand now. They would choose composites and chips and light that whispers. The principle would be the same. The river would carry it. And down below, the farms, the forests, the substations, the schoolyards would be the same too, arranged in bright squares and dark folds with people among them whose lives swing on minutes and inches. That is not a reason to be afraid. It is a reason to remember that cleverness is not wisdom, that desperation breeds risk, and that the quiet pieces of a war, the memos, the glues, the bits of wire that hold a scheme together, often matter as much as the loud ones. The story of Fugo ends not with conquest or spectacle, but with a cleanup. Teams move through woods and fields, following word of mouth and rumors, finding what they can and burying or detonating what they must. The last fragments that can kill are taken away. The paper that should have burned long ago is finally torn by hands that understand what it once meant. The wind keeps moving. The barns fill with hay again. The power lines hum again. In Oregon, a small stone monument stands near a path where people still walk on weekends. They read the plaque. They look up into the branches. They listen to the breeze. They go home quieter than they arrived. And somewhere past the coast, very high, a river of air races on with no memory of what once rode it.